What we do here is go back.
Hello and welcome to Mr. Toyama's AP World History. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 5, Early Society in East Asia. First up, we're going to go over a little bit of a summary. The cultures of East Asia had relatively little direct contact with the complex societies to the west. Nevertheless, powerful states, the Jia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, sophisticated technologies, and highly stratified societies developed along the banks of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers in China. These early societies were built on the foundation that would endure for millennia. Some of the significant components of which include the following. These societies believed in the principle that the emperor was granted the power to rule through the mandate of heaven. Thus, the emperor, known as the Son of Heaven, served as a crucial link between the heavenly powers and the people on earth. The extended family was the primary institution of society. The patriarchal head of the family wielded tremendous power and shouldered great responsibilities. It was his job to see that the appropriate religious rituals were observed in the worship of the family's departed ancestors. These ancestors were believed to have control over the living family's well-being. A writing system spread widely throughout China and still persists in its basic form. Although modified through time, consequently, Chinese society has experienced a virtually uninterrupted literary tradition. Sharp distinctions and clearly defined roles within the society were based on class, gender, and age. Alright, so to get a little bit of context, we're going to talk first about the Yellow River, which is in the northeast section of modern-day China. It's also known as the Huanghe. It's about 3,000 miles. It runs all the way from Tibet to the Yellow Sea. Now, the reason it's called the Yellow River is because it deposits this fertile and light-colored soil. As the glaciers receded during the Ice Age of the formation of the Earth, the soil that kind of came down with the running water was this yellowish kind of consistency, and this light-colored soil would fill the river. And as it filled the river, it brought a lot of minerals, nutrients to the soil. And the problem with it is that this soil and this kind of soot kind of silt that comes into silt comes into the river. It creates like a soup-like consistency for the river, and it actually forces the river to flood at periodic times. This has become known as China's sorrow, because this periodic flooding for a very long time, especially during the time that we're talking about right now, was unregulated. It was unable to be predicted, so it would wash away whole villages, it could wash away crops, it could create just massive amounts of havoc for the people living in the Yellow River. First up, we're going to talk about prehistoric society. Prehistoric society is known as the Yangshao. It started around 5,000 to about 3,000 BCE. It's in the middle region of the Yellow River Valley, and it had what we would call a regionalized government. It was able to oversee a small section with a strong centralized government that oversaw a lot of the commerce and trade and government going-ons in that area. We know it was a pretty technologically advanced area because we were able to dig up a place known as Banpo Village. And through archaeological evidence, we were able to find a couple things. Number one, we found painted pottery, and painted pottery shows the use of kilns, shows the use of being able to develop clay from digging out the clay from the earth, and being able to create different types of artistic craftsmen who were using that paint to create painted pottery, but also craftsmen who would form the pots, and also artisans that were skilled at making paint. We also know that at this time in the Yangshao, there is a great metallurgical development. Now, the signifiers for cultural growth come from, mostly at this early stages of human history, our understanding of how people interacted with the metals that they found in the ground. One of the biggest signifiers for the growth of the Yangshao people is the creation of bronze tools. Bronze is a combination of two different metals that are melted down and blended together. It's called an alloy, if you remember from chemistry class. You have bronze tools which come from copper being mixed with tin, and as they are melted down and mixed together, they create a harder substance known as bronze, which is able to be sharpened to sharp edge, so they can make plows, they can make axes, they can make swords, they can make spears. And at this time, that monopoly, or being able to oversee one specific good and keeping it within your control and not letting others have it, is something that distinguishes the Yangshao people group from other people groups. Well, we have three earliest dynasties that we're going to talk about after the Yangshao. We have the Jia, the Shang, and the Zhou. It's around 2200 BCE that the Jia shows up. It's organized through a village network. This organized village network was ruled by one leader, just through a hereditary monarchy, meaning that the power was passed through the family from usually father to son. In some instances, we do have some accounts where it transferred from families, but mostly it's just passed down from one person in the line of the family to another. This organized village network was given commands by bureaucrats at the time, who were then taking the words or the decrees of the leader at the time and sending out through this network and being enforced through the military. One of the big developments that the Jia figure out is flood control. Being able to control that Yellow River is a very big technological advancement. One of the things that you need to be able to do to create society is the development of agriculture. We've talked about this in the past, and one of those developments of agriculture is being able to control how much water gets to your crops, when they get the water to the crops, and how much nutrients you're getting to your crops through the use of minerals. While they might not have known about the mineral content of the river, they for sure knew that plants needed water, and it seemed natural to use the power of the river and its periodic flooding and being able to control that flooding by creating dams and walls through some of their military processes. The Shang, we're going to talk about a little later, from 1766 to 1122 BCE, and the Zhao from 1122 to 256 BCE are some of the earliest dynasties we're going to talk about. Next up, we have the Shang dynasty. One of the big things that the Shang dynasty was able to do is take that bronze metallurgy principle and create a state monopoly on it. Not only were they able to tightly control and regulate who was receiving the bronze, but also they were able to figure out a way to have the state or the government being in absolute control of the bronze that was given out to the peoples. By this process of creating bronze, the Chinese were able to create some things that were able to help them much more efficiently in war. One of the big ones was horse-drawn chariots. Now, horse-drawn chariots you might not think of as being important, but they're very important in warfare because you're able to move your troops very quickly across the battlefield. You're able to move them in very quick lines across, and you're able to disorient your enemy because you're able to move faster than they are. They can't shift, change ranks, do a lot of the tactics that you need to do in war. And so these horse-drawn chariots were very efficient at damaging troops in large numbers, and they were able to get you out of the way of harm after you had quickly attacked. They also created other wheeled vehicles such as carts. The Shang dynasty was able to grow its influence through the use of large armies, thousands of soldiers being able to be sent out and protect the villages, but also to dominate villages that were not in its network at the time and brought under the control of the Shang. There was also political organization. There was a network of fortified cities loyal to its center. These fortified cities, we have a very famous example at Ao, or Ao. They built this wall, and one of the things that they were able to do is they were able to pile up different types of mud and clay, and then they were able to, through the use of water, then they were able to beat the outer parts of the wall with hammers until they packed it in very tightly. Then they would create another layer and another layer and another layer, making it as thick as they could. The ancient architecture that we're looking at Ao or Ao was in some places up to 13 meters tall. Now, having walls around your city, as we talked about in ancient Mesopotamia and in other parts of the Indus River Valley, there is great amounts of protection that's able to be kept for your people. If you have no walls, you can be invaded, people can go through your town, whereas if you have some form of protection in the form of wall, at least troops can't run directly into your town. They have to find entrances. You can fortify yourselves within the town. You can protect your people within the town. And this made those cities that were fortified loyal to that center of the Shang dynasty. At one point, the Shang dynasty controlled probably as many as 1,000 cities within their network. And one of the big things that we know about the Shang dynasty is its capital moved 6 times, either for economic or for military and political reasons. This movement, every time the capital moved, brought new centers of culture, trade, religion, all the things that we would denote as civilization to those 6 cities. And from there, it grew and grew and grew to bring the Shang dynasty a lot of prominence. Another impressive architecture is in the city of Yin. We see tombs that were similar to Egypt with the sacrificial remains, and I'll talk about that on the next slide a little bit. And at the same time, we have other regional kingdoms that are coexisting at the same time, namely the Sanjui Di. Sanjui. Yes, that's how you say it. Now, the Shang dynasty had certain burial practices. Since it was a hierarchical social structure, meaning there was a leader at the top, and then there were generals, and then there were other types of very important people, one of the things that they would do is, let's say, for example, the king died. We wouldn't call him an emperor today, but we would call him a king. When he would die, as a way to honor this king, similar to what happened in Egypt, many victims would be sacrificed on the day of his death and buried along with this king. The burials of deceased, the member of the ruling class, were, for example, mostly slaves who would serve him in the afterlife. His wives would be kept with him by killing them and putting him in the grave with him. His servants who served him in this life. His friends, so he'd have people to talk to. And hunting companions, people who he probably went hunting with. And in the next life, if there is a great hunting field, he would need some people to go hunting with. This is later replaced by statuary, often monumental burial practices, what we would consider today as like statues or gravestones or grave markers. They move away from this mostly because of very practical reasons. In Egypt, it was very difficult to really convince large groups of people to commit so much death and destruction to the death of one person, while at the same time it does kind of denote a power and an influence on a culture. Many of the Chinese kind of moved away from that, instead creating the statuary or monumental architecture that wasn't in the ground, but more people could come by later and see, wow, this was a great man, look at this great big tomb, or look at this great big statue of this person. And alongside of most of these sacrificial victims, there was lots of bronze, lots of mirrors, lots of chariots, pretty much anything you could think of that you might use in your present life would be buried alongside of him so he wouldn't be bored in the afterlife. Next, we get to the Zhao dynasty, which is 1122 to 256 BCE. They developed this really interesting idea that there are no law codes. Like we saw with Hammurabi and his code back in Mesopotamia, there isn't really any written down laws that people can read and understand, or even have told to them and understand. Instead, it's called rule by decree. Now, this ruling by decree is based on the idea that the king would say, for example, that everyone has to do a certain action on such and such day of the month, next month. This would then be sent out by messengers, and the messengers would get to the village, assemble the people, and read in a loud voice. The great emperor, or the great king, would like all of the people of the Zhao dynasty to do such and such on the such and such day of the next month. And this was just the way people operated. The king said we have to do it, so we better go and do it. The mandate of heaven idea creates, it starts around this time. The mandate of heaven is simply this. As the leader, there must be a reason why this person is in charge. It's not just simply that he is probably really powerful. The gods or the spirits or the afterlife, however they looked at it, was giving this person the power to be kind of a conduit or a connection between the spiritual realm and earth. So as the leader gets inspiration or gets information from the spiritual world where things are happening in heaven, he then collects the information and disseminates it or gives it out to all his people. And the idea was that there was an alignment between what is happening either in heaven or the afterlife and a connection between the world now. We'll see this idea pop up again a little bit later when we talk about the European kings. But one of the big ideas that you need to take away is that they believe that the the mandate of heaven created this special title for the kings known as the Son of Heaven. And even all the way into the 20th century, many Chinese leaders called themselves Sons of Heaven, denoting back to this mandate of heaven idea that people are connected to the spirits or the afterlife through their prominence or preeminence in this culture. Now, you might ask, what happens if, for example, the leader dies, or if the leader gets overthrown? Well, then the mandate of heaven idea still is intact, because all you have to say is the spirits weren't happy with that guy, so they put in a new guy who now is the Son of Heaven, and he is going to be our new connection to the afterlife or to the spiritual realm. There is this aggregation of villages opposed to Shang leadership, and through the decentralization of authority, it starts to kind of fall apart near the end of 256 BCE. Because the Zhao dynasty required a lot of taxes, and it was a large dynasty for its time, the people at certain times said, no, we're not going to pay the taxes. And through this, regional warlords or regional leaders popped up all over the places, overseeing small village sections or even overseeing a number of villages, and they were seen as more of the authority than the actual Zhao leader. Through this decentralization, people are able to have more connection to their local leaders and less connection to a faraway king. And one of the big changes that happens to the Zhao dynasty is ability to kind of ending the Shang dynasty through its monopoly on bronze. The Zhao dynasty had this cheap iron weaponry. Iron is another metal that you can dig out of the ground through iron ore, and since bronze takes two different metals and ore, and it's a melting process and can be created in a very quick way, but it is an expensive process at the time because it was very rare. You have people who are actually saying, okay, we need to find another tool, and one of the tools that they're able to find is iron. Iron can be beaten, heated up, dug out of the ground, and melted down and made into swords. And while you might not be able to, for example, have the resiliency of, say, bronze, iron is relatively cheap in comparison to bronze. And so when you can outfit many more soldiers with iron weapons compared to the very few people you could actually outfit with bronze weapons, the Shang dynasty slowly goes into decline. And the decline of the Zhao dynasty. This decentralized leadership style allows for building of regional powers, like I talked about. There's increasing local independence, the refusal to pay Zhao taxes, talked about that a minute ago. Iron metallurgy allows for widespread creation of weaponry, talked about that. Northern invaders weaken the Zhao dynasty beginning in the 8th century BCE. We'll talk about that in a second. And internal dissension. This time is specifically known as the period of warring states from 403 to 221 BCE. People were fighting in all of these little regional kingdoms, fighting for power, fighting for control, trying to push one another out, trying to take over each other's kingdoms and sections. And so this created conflict between the peoples. China, during the period of warring states, you can see the Jin, the Zhu, the Song, the Lu, the Kuai, the Yan, the Jia, the Wei, the Zhou, the Ha. Hey, I did that pretty well. But you can see how all those states at the same time are warring with one another, trying to fight for control, but mostly they're all revolving around those river valleys and trying to keep as much power and influence as it can over the small areas that they're in charge of. Now, within those groups, there's this idea of social order. So we're going to talk about how did they organize themselves. We're going to look at this a lot again and again and again and again throughout history. How is the society structured? Who's on top? Who's on the bottom? Who's doing the work? Who's resting in luxury? And one of the first things that happens is there are 5 different groups. First is the ruling class. They have great advantage. They have giant compounds. They live a luxurious lifestyle. They are supported by agricultural surplus and tax revenues. I am for example, a peasant. I work the land, and as I work the land, any surplus goes to the owner or ruler of that section or the ruling classes of that area, and then at the same time, they're also taking taxes from my crops, from my work, from whatever I do, and they're living high on that. They were defended by the monopoly on bronze weaponry. They were able to give to themselves this bronze weaponry that was able to quell rebellions. Since most people did not have access to these bronze weapons, they were able to pretty much keep the people and the population at bay, and they believed in hereditary privilege. Now, hereditary privilege works that land or titles, probably less likely the specific titles of king, but at least regional rulers, would be passed on from father to son, or from at least one member of a family, male usually, to another male member of the same family. This allowed the ruling classes to stay a class. It didn't fluctuate very much, and it just kind of kept rolling along for a few centuries. Right below the ruling classes were the artisans and the craftsmen. They would receive support from the ruling classes to create bowls and pots and walls and metal weapons and all the kinds of things that would take an artisan or someone who has to be skilled at crafting something to be supported, and they lived in pretty much relative luxury, closely aligned with the ruling classes. They weren't basically relaxing around all day, but for sure they had an easier life than the lower groups that I'm about to talk about. There is evidence of long-distance trade, so we know there was a merchant class. We know that they were able to create routes through just desert and through very far away as India, and they were able to connect China and India during this time through trade routes. A large class of semi-servile peasants. These are people who we wouldn't call them slaves, but we would call them people who couldn't leave the land. They were forced to live pretty much in service of the community, in service of growing crops, and they didn't really have anything to call their own in terms of land, but for sure they were the types of people who were able to grow crops and goods for people that were above them. And finally, there was a slave class. They did all the jobs that people did not want to do in the other classes, and they pretty much did a lot of the back-breaking menial labor, such as transportation, building, a lot of just like lifting bricks and moving mortar and mud and dirt wherever it needed to go. Next, we're going to talk about family and patriarchy. There was, at this time, a development of devotion to family and ancestor veneration. Along with that mandate of heaven style stuff, there was a very close connection between what the Chinese would see as the afterlife or the spirit world, and they believed that by being devoted to your family, you were supporting an overall structure in general of good luck or good fortune. So having familial piety, being able to connect your efforts and connect your goals towards making your family successful or pulling in the same direction or doing the same, having the same goals, would create positive vibes, I guess is the best way to put it, or positive outcomes. And at the same time, it's not just the responsibility of those living in the family, but even those that have gone on ahead and died, that they were watching from the other worlds, or the other spirit world, and they were helping or harming based on how you treated or respected them. So there was this idea of, for example, burying tools with the deceased or burying goods and items to make them happy. And later traditions denote that at grave sites, people would leave food or drinks or wine, and they would try and please the spirits and make them happy enough so that good fortune would come to the family at the present time. They would also make ritual sacrifices to try and appease the spirits of the dead ancestors. And the kind of key thing that makes this type of religion different from other religions we've seen in the past is that the Chinese did not have centralized priest class. In India, in Mesopotamia, they have specific classes of people that work to create the rites and rituals. And in some instances, we have famous examples of women from very prominent families within the traditions actually overseeing these rituals. But the idea was that the father was the ritual head of the family, right? So the oldest male would oftentimes oversee all of the family's duties and making sure that the ancestors are happy, and it was on his shoulders to act as the priest for this spiritualism. I wouldn't call it a formalized religion, but at least a spiritualism towards ancestor veneration. There was early prominence of individual female leaders. Women at this time were honored and revered, but as later in the Shang and Zhou dynasties, this kind of fades away that as women become less and less prominent and important, and more seen as only important in reference to their connection to their maybe amazing husbands or them being daughters of great generals and things like that. Next, as part of this religion, they had this interesting idea called oracle bones. They were used for communication with the spirit world and determining the future. We'll see this again when we get back to Greece. One of the things that the oracle bones did is that the Chinese would take either turtle shells or bones, like shoulder bones from sheep. They might have a question like, is my crop going to be very good this year? So the oracle would write on the bones or on the turtle shells things like, is my crop going to be good this year? Or is Mr. Toyama's crops going to be good this year? And they would either take a hot tool, like a very hot tool from the fire, and press it onto the bone until it made cracks, or they would throw the bones into the fire until they developed cracks, and then after a set amount of time or prayers, they would pull the bones out, and they would look at the cracks, and then the oracle would divine from how specifically the cracks formed whether or not I would have a good crop or an answer to my question that I had written on it. And early archaeological evidence of Chinese writing develops from this time. This is how we know that early Chinese writing actually existed and what form it took. We also can see the evolution of Chinese script through this process. It goes from pictograph, which means representing an object, to an ideograph, meaning representing ideas. So, for example, here is ancient pictographs and their present-day characters. So the first one we see is like a child, and it says, look for the baby, his arms, and his head. If you look very closely at the top left, you'll see kind of looks like little horns, and then a head, and then arms, like kind of going in for a hug, and then it kind of looks like the baby has a tail. And then you compare that to the modern-day symbols, and then you can see almost a slight evolution if you erase and squint and do some other things. I like to also jump over to, for example, tree. The tree looks like there are roots and branches going out everywhere in the ancient pictograph version, but in the ideograph version of modern day or traditional Chinese, you can see the roots and its branches in the mu symbol. This shows an evolution of Chinese writing over time. If you've ever wondered where Chinese writing actually came from, then obviously you can see that it was originally used similar to what was used in Egypt. That idea that symbols on walls could just be pictures or drawings of whatever that item is, and we would understand, okay, that looks like a tree, so therefore this sentence is about a tree, and then it says the sun, and I guess the sun makes the tree happy, and you can kind of develop an idea about what is being communicated through these pictographs. And over time, these pictographs evolve into ideographs, which are more formalized and more specifically have sounds associated with them and express whole ideas within certain symbols that can be repeated over and over. Here's another picture of oracle bone from the Shang dynasty. It was kind of hard to see, so I made sure to get another picture from before. During the Zhao period, there's literature. There are the reflections of Confucius, a lot of focus on familial piety, on order, on keeping things the way they're supposed to be. The father is at the top, then the oldest males right after him, and then the oldest women, and then finally down to the youngest females. That was the hierarchy, that was the order, and that all those things were to be respected at all times. Confucius is also big into being frugal. He was big into communicating wisdom, and so during the Zhao time, Confucius is a very widely read philosopher, as we call him today. Another book is the Book of Changes. It's a manual for divination. It tells you how to do the oracle bones. It tells you how to understand more and more of what the gods want, or just the way of understanding how to do this whole process with divining. There's a book of history. The book of history pretty much outlined the Zhao state, and it justified why it was so awesome and powerful and all the military conquests and the people it took over, and it kept records. There was a book of etiquette, which was like a book of rights. The book of etiquette talked about manners and how you're supposed to sit, act, do all sorts of things. The book of rights was on how the father was supposed to lead the family in its religious duties. And then there's the book of songs, which is very interesting because it has things like poems. Some are very deep and moving, and some are just silly and kind of fun songs and poems. From what we know, little of it has survived. The problem of all of this is that originally it was often written on perishable bamboo strips. Bamboo at the time was seen as very sturdy and reliable, but over the centuries, it's pretty much fallen apart, and it's very difficult to read. It's not something that's able to be preserved in the way we would preserve, for example, papyrus or modern paper. And so, since it's been written on perishable bamboo strips, they fell apart, and often many were destroyed with the emperor of the Qin dynasty in 221, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. Finally, we're coming to the nomadic peoples of Central Asia. We're going to talk about the steppe nomads. This is how you say it, steppe, like a stepping stool, or the steps on your house in two-story. There were poor lands for cultivation, and so they moved into extensive herding activities. If you are somebody who cannot cultivate in the steppe, which is a very jagged and often hilly section of the Central Asia, you're not able to grow rice and paddies. You're not able to grow a lot of different crops in a flat plain and give it irrigation. And so they moved on to herding instead. Sheeps, horses, those sorts of things. Horses were domesticated around 4000 BCE, and bronze metallurgy was developed in 2900 BCE. They had extensive trade with those sedentary cultures in China, those cultures that we talked about a little bit ago that didn't move whole villages. The nomads didn't call any one place their home. They would graze on the grassland of the steppe, and then they would move their crops and move their horses to a new area to graze some more. There was, however, tensions, which was frequent raiding. Whenever the steppe nomads needed things or were growing low on supplies, many times they would raid villages, they would attack caravans of traders, and they would pretty much just find ways to make money or goods however they could. Less on the money, more on the goods. Then we get to what's known as the southern expansion of Chinese society. We've been focused mostly on the north and the northeast area by the Yellow River. We're going to get to the Yangtze Valley, which has the Yangtze River, known as Changjiang, or the Long River. It was excellent for rice cultivation. One of the great things about the Yangtze River is that the river doesn't flood as often and as devastatingly as the Yellow River, and as such, they could build irrigation systems that could have controls on whether water went into a rice paddy or a field, and they also were able to control how the crops were watered and what time. It also had a subtropical climate, and it rained a lot there, so the crops got a lot of water. At one point, they were able to actually grow 2 harvests of rice a year, and if you can think about back to one of our first lectures, I talked about as calorie counts go up, population increases. Imagine having double the amount of calories per year as anyone else. You're going to obviously grow. One of the states that rise during this time is the state of Chu. It was autonomous, meaning it acted on its own. It didn't really need any other groups to support it, and it challenged the Zhou dynasty in prominence and power, and its culture was heavily influenced by Chinese culture. It wasn't exactly the same as the northern Chinese that we talked about before, but for sure they were integrating themselves with them, trading with them, following a lot of the customs, the rituals, and they were able to interact with each other mostly in peaceful ways, but sometimes violently. So we made it. When you finish this chapter, you should be able to do the following. Discuss the early agricultural society and political developments in early China. Easy. Understand the rise and fall of the Zhou dynasty. Make sure you kind of follow along with that. Identify key aspects of ancient Chinese society and culture. Explain the connections between early Chinese writing and cultural development. Understand the relationship between Chinese cultivators and the nomadic peoples in Central Asia. And finally, identify the reasons behind the southern expansion of Chinese society. Here's your writing assignment. Write a short 5 to 8 sentence response to the following questions using specific examples from the textbook and be prepared to discuss them in class. Number 1. Many of the institutions and customs that emerged in East Asia during this era persisted into the 20th century or even the present. Why do you think this is so? Why does there seem to be more continuity in East Asian history than in other parts of the world? Why is it that, over time, most of East Asian communities have not thrown away the old customs? For example, modern Egyptians do not write in hieroglyphics. They do not have a leader called a pharaoh, and they do not kill thousands of servants of that leader when he dies. So why is it that many of the traditions, customs, societal norms of ancient China continue even to today? Number 2, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a form of writing that is pictograph and ideographic like Chinese versus the one that's alphabetic? Pictograph and ideographs, we talked about before. Pictograph meaning a picture that represents the item, and an ideograph is a symbol that represents the idea, is different from something like our alphabet. In Chinese, you can write one symbol to represent tree. In English, you have to write 4 letters from the alphabet to communicate the same idea. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that style? Number 3, how do early East Asian religious beliefs and practices differ from those of the other early cultures you've studied so far? What do these differences imply about other society structures and their most important values? So when you come back, we're going to go ahead and continue on with Chapter 6, the early societies in Americas and Oceania. I'll see you soon. Bye.
What we do here is go back.